Hi, I'm Pat and welcome back to the channel. Today I got a box right here with new downpipes for the Acura NSX. Now in this box is the ScienceofSpeed downpipes for the Acura NSX. What these should give me is a little bit more sound and a tiny bit more performance that I actually won't be able to detect. But I want to be able to hear this car much better when I'm in Sport Plus mode, and these will do the trick for me. Now ScienceofSpeed already has a video out on how to install these downpipes. And I don't want to recreate exactly what they've put on their video, but my video will actually include things that I notice during the process of disassembling the car and reassembling it in order to get these downpipes in the car, as well as some tips and tricks that I've learned from other exhaust installations that I've done over the years. So let's get started with an unboxing and see exactly what's in here. This box is well put together. I gotta tell you, they did a great job with the packaging. All right, packaging is excellent. They definitely use a lot of foam in here in order to protect what's in here. Now, I also ordered some other parts, but this is for a future video. Wow. Look at that. These are magnificent. The quality of the welds on here. Got my own serial number right here. That looks terrific. Look at that. So here's our catalytic converter on this end. And you can see the honeycomb in there. And of course we have a flexible section here in the middle. We have a port for our downstream oxygen sensor and the area where our muffler bolts into. These are pretty long. I don't think I've ever seen a downpipe this long before. Wow, that's terrific. All right, so let's get these back in the box and out of the way. We got to do a lot of work to the Acura in order to get these installed. Now I already have the Acura NSX up on these Quickjacks, and if you're interested about the Quickjacks, I have a link in the description below. These things actually fit just underneath the car and leave about, I'd say about 1/4 inch to the jack blocks that are on the NSX. And these are the 7,000 pound version, so I can lift almost anything. So these work great on this car. So first step is going to be to remove the wheels. And in order to get these off, we have to remove the caps over the lug nuts. Now I've already gone ahead and lowered this panel. This sits back here inside the trunk. And this is the little tool that we need in order to remove the caps over the lug studs. Now the way this works is you spread it open a little bit and you push it in until it clicks, and then you give a pull, and then out comes the cap. So we're going to do this on all 5. Next we're going to remove our wheel. I have a 17mm socket here with a nylon cover over it to protect my wheels, and I also have this little pilot stud here. So I'm going to remove one wheel bolt and replace it with this so that I can remove my wheel without it falling onto the caliper. Now, I have links in the description below if you're interested in any of these products. Now I can grasp the wheel, and I'm going to just go ahead and keep my legs up against the wheel so I can support it, so then I can lower it slowly out of the way. Now that we have access to the wheel well, I'm going to start by removing 2 Phillips head screws. The first one is actually located right here. And the second one, well, it's under here, right there. Next, we have 14 of these little plastic rivets, and they're everywhere. So I have a little trim removal tool that I'm going to use in order to remove these rivets and not damage them in the process. But next I have a T30 bit here. I'm going to use that underneath here. There's 3 bolts that'll come out easily and allow the bottom of the back of the fender liner to come out. And I'll be using this palm ratchet. I really like this, and there's a link in the description below if you're interested. Now finally we have 5 5mm hex bolts, and they're located in the rear part here. The reason why I left these for last is because once I pull all these out, I should just be able to drop the entire wheel arch out and pull it out. So it would be much easier to be able to do these last because these are pretty much suspending everything from the top. All right, now that I have all the bolts out of here, I'm going to start by pulling some of these areas towards the back out first. And of course, I got a bunch of rocks and debris. pretty common with a used car like this. Now, one thing to take note of is that there are some plastic rivets here that are not removable. You don't need to remove them because they actually hold the heat shield to the backside of this wheel arch. So when you see these, just ignore them. No need to remove them. Now that the wheel wells are removed, we can use our T30 bit in order to remove 8 of these different bolts that are underneath the carbon diffuser. The next step before removing the bumper will be to disconnect this wiring harness. Now this is in a very tough position to get into. So what I'm going to do first is I'm just going to pinch these plastic tabs and be able to push the connector through the holder, and that'll allow me to take the connector out and then flip it around. Of course, I'm getting in the way of the camera, but the whole point is to be able to see this side of the connector so that I can stick a small screwdriver in there and pull it apart. All right, there I go. I actually got it. I had to do it off camera because my hands needed to get in the way. But yeah, just pushing in on this tab that's down here is enough to release this mechanism, and then you could pull the 2 pieces apart. Now inside the bumper here, there are 2 fasteners. There's one Phillips head that's right here, and then right under here is a T30 bit. So we'll remove both of those fasteners from both sides of the car. Another thing to note here, as we're starting to remove the bumper, we want to make sure that we get this plastic tab on the other side of this metal plate. So it's kind of difficult right now to actually move it, but once we start to loosen up the bumper itself, it should become loose enough to be able to take this and slide it on the other side of this metal bracket. Next, I'm going to take some painter's tape and I'm going to put it at every location where the bumper meets either a light or the side of the car, and that's to prevent any kind of scratches when we go ahead and remove the bumper. It was fairly easy for me to slip the painter's tape into the gaps, so I slid it in there and then pushed it down and was able to easily mask off the entire bumper. Next, I want to take some soapy water, or in my case I'm just going to use some detail spray, and we're going to spray in between all these gaps in order to lubricate them so it's a little bit easier to start removing some of the tabs that are holding all these pieces together. Next, I want to start to pry this area away from this area. Literally, it comes up pretty easy because the snaps right here undo pretty quickly. And as we're doing that, we're going to go ahead and free up this area right here to try to get this piece of plastic to go over this piece of metal as we're freeing these up. There we go. And there's a little plastic clip that's on the other side of that metal piece that just popped out. This holds the screw. So I'm just going to set this aside so when I reassemble this, I'll make sure to put that back in place. So I'm pushing from the inside of the bumper here as I'm also pulling at the very top. And here, let's get a closer look at what these clips look like for the release mechanism. So there's an elbow right here. There's some right under here, underneath the light, and they go around and up above. And the same on the other side. Now, looking at the bumper itself, here's where the tabs go in. So you can get a good look. There's a couple there, some here. And the same on the other side. Now, the entire inside of the rear bumper here, we could see our wiring harness for all of our sensors. Of course, we have the grills here in the back, license plate holder here, of course our exhaust exit, and heat shields. All right, so the next step in the process is to go ahead and remove this, and we're just going to be able to pick it up and twist it, I think, in order to get it out. There we go. So I have a 14 millimeter socket. I can go ahead and use this in order to break all of these bolts loose. I went ahead and put a tripod on that side so that when I loosen this side up, well, I don't lose the entire bumper. This crash bar is actually being held in place by some rubber muffler hangers. Those orange pieces right there, that is what holds this to the muffler system. So these are exhaust removal pliers, and what you do is you put the pin, which would be on this side, against here, and then you push. There we go. Now I'll give you a better view from that angle, so I'm going to go around the stud that goes through the exhaust hanger, and I'm going to use the pin part to push on the end that's holding this crash bar to the muffler mount. There it goes. So that gets it started. I should just be able to give it a quick twist and a pull here to get it the rest of the way out. There it is. Now that we have the crash bar out of the way, our next step is going to be to go ahead and soak these bolts here, nuts and bolts, with penetrating oil. I have some penetrating oil right here, PB Blaster, or this works just fine. And on each side over here, one side and the other side, there are 3 studs and 3 nuts. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to soak these overnight, and then the next day I'm going to start wrenching on these. Next, we're going to go ahead and release this cable from the brackets using pliers. I'm just going to pinch these little plastic things and be able to pull them loose. And then we're going to disconnect these connections that go to the exhaust valves. So if we take a close look in here, it's this right here. I have to push down and then pull away. There we go, real easy. I'll do the same on the other side. And then I'm going to take this wiring harness and tuck it up out of the way, because I don't want it to be next to the exhaust, because that's actually what's coming down next. Our next step in the process is going to be to remove the 3 nuts that hold the muffler to the downpipe. Now they're right here, and I'm going to use a 14mm on a long extension in order to break these loose. Now, even though I've sprayed these with penetrating oil, they don't seem to want to come off easy. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to heat them up with a propane torch here, and that way I can actually get them hot enough that they start to expand. Now we'll give it a try and see if anything actually helped make this job a little bit easier. Yep, that's great. A little bit of heat always helps. So I've already gone ahead and loosened all of the nuts and removed them. So now the only thing left to remove are the hangers on both sides. What I'm doing now is I'm sliding a little rolly chair underneath the exhaust so that I can actually capture this side of the exhaust and work on just removing this part, let it lay on here, and then switch over to the other side. So I have some soft soap here from the bathroom, and I'm just going to spread that all around this metal piece here so it will more easily push through this rubber. Then I could take my exhaust hanger tool and I could line it up just behind this rubber piece. And so the pusher is here on the front, and I should be able to squeeze and force it through. Okay. That takes care of that side. Now this, like I said, is being supported only by this rolly chair right now. So let's go on to the other side and do the same. So I'm going to slowly work this side of the exhaust out. There we are. isn't too heavy, but it's awkward. So it can be done as a one-person job, but obviously would be so much easier with two. Now that I've removed the mufflers and set them aside, it's time to lower the car because I need to get inside the engine compartment to do the next steps. So I'm going to take the Quickjack and then lower the car down to its halfway point. All right, so I have the car low enough now that I could actually climb on a small ladder and get in here. I'm just going to start by removing the side engine covers, and these are fairly easy to remove. Just pull straight up, and there's some rubber grommets that hold it down. I'm just taking one at a time here. There are actually 5 different places where it connects. Next, I'm going to remove the front engine cover up here, and there's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 different T30 Torx bits, and we'll just go ahead and remove those and lift this panel out of the way. And one thing to note, there's actually a smaller screw, and that's the one that goes up in the very front. So the front will be small and the 2 on the sides will be longer. And now that I've removed all of the bolts, there are some of the rubber grommets that are still stuck to some parts of the carbon fiber. So I'm just going to let that be. I don't want to disturb that. And it seems like there's something here holding down the middle section. I think it might be just a rubber grommet. Yeah, there we go. Okay, let me set this aside. And next we'll remove the back engine cover using the same T30 Torx bit. And it doesn't look like these really require that much torque in order to remove them. And yet again, we have smaller ones that go in the back and longer ones that go here towards the front. And then we could just lift up on this piece and out it comes. Next, we're going to remove the top of the air cleaner assembly. Now, if you've seen my video, link in the description below, on putting the K&N air filters into this car, it's going to be the same process in order to get these lids off. So I'm going to use a 7/32 socket and undo the clamp at the very back. I'm going to undo the wiring harness to the MAF sensor, and that's a pinch down and then pull away. And I'm also going to undo the wiring harness that's suspended to the top of the air cleaner. And then I'll undo the 4 clamps that hold the top of the air box onto the bottom assembly. Next, we'll just grab a hold of the top of the air cleaner lid, and as we twist and pull it up, it'll dislodge from the rubber tube here. And then we can go ahead and remove our air cleaner itself. That now gives us access to the duct and the air cleaner itself, because that's what we're going to end up removing next. But first, I'll take off the other side. All right, now you're a little bit closer to the action. This is the intake tube that goes down into the bottom of the air cleaner box. So we want to pull this away from the body. There's just 2 little silver nubs that hold this in place. There we go. So there's a little silver thing right here that holds this in place, and this tucks up underneath the body, of course, and then goes to the top of the air cleaner. Now that this is out of the way, we can undo the actual bottom of the box. Now we have to remove a couple 10mm bolts in order to get this out. So I'm going to start by removing the 10mm bolt here at the back. And that's being held in place by the actual box itself, which is really nice. That way we don't drop it. But this one isn't. Nothing's holding this one in place. So we got to take a good hold of that. And there's one more that's down here in the back, just behind this rubber hose. There's another one back here on the other side of the hose. And that one is captive as well. So we have one bolt that doesn't have anything keeping it in, but the other 3 bolts are actually part of the bottom of the air cleaner assembly. Now that that's out of the way, I'll go ahead and take care of the other side the same way. Now that I've removed the air cleaner housing from both sides, I'm going to now remove this large silver plate that the air cleaner bolts to. So there's a 10mm bolt here, and then there are 2 10mm bolts way down in there. So I'm going to grab my socket and a swivel and then pull these out off camera. Okay, our next step is to remove that oxygen sensor, and we have to disconnect this wiring harness first. So that's just a quick pull there, and then we'll use the socket that fits over top of the oxygen sensor here. And of course there's one here on the right side as well. So that'll be our next step. All right, so I have a couple extensions here on top of an oxygen sensor deep socket. And I'm going to apply some pressure, and I'm probably going to knock my camera over, so I'm going to move the camera out of the way. Right, so I had to get the GoPro out of the way, but I did break this loose, and I can go ahead and unscrew the oxygen sensor. Now, there is some debris in this little cup, and this cup here appears to be loose. So some rocks and whatnot got in there from when the car was driven in the past. I don't want any of that falling down into the charge pipe. I guess it won't matter since I'm just removing it anyway, but I'm going to see if I can remove this without getting any debris anywhere. There we go. And now that that's complete, I'm going to do the same on the other side. All right, the oxygen sensor is out of there, and I went ahead and put all the different components deep down inside here, including the oxygen sensors, because of course we're going to want to keep them for when we need to reinstall them, obviously. Now, this is the tool that I picked up. It's a Tecton, and there's a part number here. I'll have a link in the description below. I like this because it's deep reach and it's dead on. It's dead on the center. It's not like one of those that goes off to the side. And it has a nice gap here in the side so your wiring can fit through. And this will fit over top of your oxygen sensor and break it loose with no problem. I just used a long breaker bar and an extension, and I got them off. Now I'm going to move down to the wheel wells, and I'm going to remove these two top bolts here in this plastic duct. Now this allows air to come down and cool or provide some type of air cooling around the exhaust. So that's going to come out next, and this is going to give me better access to be able to reach the front of the downpipe. I'm just going to use a 10mm socket in order to take these off. Now this duct is held into place by some tabs, so I'm just going to use this trim tool in order to separate it from the tabs and pull straight down. Now that this duct is out of the way, I can now get down in here, and there are two bolts that I have to remove there. And there are also two bolts that are just inside this frame rail. Now there are slots in this metal so that I only have to loosen those two bolts, but I have to undo the two bolts that are in the inside, and I can pick this straight up and get it out of the way. Now I was able to use this ratchet wrench, and this worked very well, this 10mm, in order to get on the other side of this frame rail to get to these other two bolts. And now I can just pick up on this and then slowly bend it a little bit in order to try to get it out of its home. There we go, and now we could see all the other bolts we need to access. So we got to get this bracket off next, and really we can get it from the top, but I'm going to need a very, very long extension bar. So this here I should be able to loosen with not too much trouble, but this is on the turbine housing. So this is the turbo here, and this bolt right here, this is going to be a little bit of a bear to get off of there. So I think I'm going to hit this with some penetrating oil and then let it soak in from this angle, because it is a bolt that goes through the turbine itself, and let it sit overnight. So I'm going to do the same work that I just did on the right side of the car over on the left side of the car. Okay, so what you're looking at now is the 14mm on top of the bracket to the housing for the turbo, and I'm actually down beside the car by where the tire is located, and I'm going to stick a pipe over this breaker bar in order to break this loose. I figured this would probably be a lot easier than trying to do it at the top of the engine. Yep, that seems to be working well. All right. So there is a washer on this bolt, and we'll put this aside, and then we'll start to break this particular bolt loose. This is a nut, and this is a 17 millimeter. Again, I'm going to stick a pipe over the breaker bar to make my life a whole lot easier. And this nut also has a washer on it, so we'll retain those. Next, we're going to remove the 4 bolts that hold this heat shield on, and we're going to use a 12 millimeter socket. And I'm just going to, again, start from the side here just to make my life a little bit easier rather than trying to get everything taken care of from the top of the engine compartment. Now we could take this bracket out of place and retain this. It's already marked for R with right. And all of these individual bolts do not have washers on them. So it's a simple remove and then lift the heat shield out of place. Now for the 3 bolts that are on the bottom of the heat shield, they're tucked right in there, here, here, and here. So I'm going to do this off camera. It's going to be kind of difficult to actually get this on camera and get them out. So I'm going to be using a swivel attachment in order to get the ones in the back. Each of these takes a 12 millimeter socket. All right, now that I have all these bolts off, I'm just going to lay the heat shield down in here so it's out of the way, so that we can now get some penetrating oil on all of these nuts and bolts that go around between the turbine housing and the downpipe. Now, while these parts up here are soaking in penetrating oil, we can then move to the back of the car. Now there are 2 brackets that are holding on the downpipes here. So here's the downpipe, and right in there is the bracket. So this connects to the downpipe and the transmission, and you have to get in there with your hands from the back in order to pull that particular bracket from each side of the car. Here you can see on the right side of the car, it's a little bit easier to see that bolt, but I'm going to use a 14 millimeter socket in order to get in there, obviously off camera, because there's no way I'm going to be able to show this process. And just an FYI, I was able to get a socket on there, and I took a pipe and put on the end of the ratchet and was able to break that loose. So you definitely need something long enough in order to be able to break that loose. Okay, now that the bolt is removed from the transmission side, now I got to get all the way up in there to the top of the downpipe in order to loosen that bolt that's connected to the other side of that mount. Now, the instructions they provide say to go in from the side of the vehicle. And if we come in from the side, you'll see we got to get pretty far back in there. I'm doing this blind, so I really can't see exactly what I'm looking at on the camera, but we'll try it from this side and see what happens. All right, got these bolts out of here. Now, this top bolt on the top of the downpipe was rusty. So I decided to go ahead and use some penetrating oil and let it soak. And then in order to get this out, you can't really use a socket. You got to use a box wrench. So of course mine has a swivel on it, and I decided to just tape it up so it wouldn't swivel, and then attached another box wrench to the other end of it so that I had leverage in order to push it. Or in this case, push it. So let me show you. I was actually on this side of the vehicle, and in this case, of course, I had to push in order to loosen the bolt that was way back in there, and on the other side of the vehicle, once I got it lined up, I had to pull. Now, it's a lot easier if you have somebody on the back end of the vehicle telling you exactly where to position that box wrench, because it's very, very, very difficult to even get your hand from the front of the car onto that box wrench and still be able to feel exactly where you're laying it, which bolt you're on, and if you're on all the way. So now that that is complete, we'll now go to the next step, which is to disconnect some of these oxygen sensors, which requires us to get in here. So there are some plastic screw heads here, and there's 2 down here at the bottom and 6 at the top. These can be kind of difficult to remove because the slot in them really isn't that deep for a screwdriver to work. So I'm going to take my plastic trim tool here and just give it a little bit of pressure outward while I unscrew it with another plastic trim tool. And then that way it comes out a little bit easier. These seem to be installed by the factory by just pushing on them, and I think over time of doing oil changes, it becomes more difficult to get these things out So this is the method that I'm using here today, and that way I don't mar up the surface. There we go. And here's a closer view of the inside of this. Obviously, in order to put this back into place, you just push it against the stud that's in here. So this method works very well to unscrew them. So next we can lower the carpeting away from the access panel. And these take 4 T30 bits in order to loosen up. And now we can remove the access panel, and in here is the connector that we could press and pull down on in order to disconnect the right sensor for oxygen sensor for this side of the car. And then there is a clip that's in here that allows it to mount up, and we just want to give that a pull in order to loosen it so that we could feed it down, and that way we can actually get that downpipe out. And now at the back of the vehicle, of course, we can see that brown cable there. Yep, that just needs to be disconnected. All right, I just needed 2 hands to get it, but got it out, and now it's out of the way, so we're ready to remove this downpipe after we undo the bolts up there. But first, we got to do the same thing because we have another oxygen sensor here. Now, luckily, that cable is connected directly below, so we don't have to go inside the trunk of the car to disconnect this one. We just have to undo the little retainer that's there and also unclip the connector. All right, next we got to remove these nuts, and we got to leave the penetrating oil sit for a while. They do recommend at least an hour, possibly more, like overnight, because everything can be kind of brittle. So they do recommend, as you're backing these off, if you do have any type of binding, is to go ahead and retighten a little bit more and then stick some more penetrating oil on these. Now I'm using a 14 millimeter, and on a breaker bar here, they do seem to be coming off pretty easily. Okay, these broke loose a lot easier than I thought they would. So right now I just left the socket on the lower inside nut, but I also used the same thing here on the top inside nut. And of course I did the 2 outside nuts from the outside of the car, from out there. So this didn't really require a whole lot of force, but I did need some leverage. So I did use my pipe over top of the ratchet, and they came off. So now I'm just going to take the rest of the nuts off and then work on the left side. All right, so this is best done with an assistant. I'm going to continue to hold pressure up on the downpipe while an assistant removes the nut from the other side. I've already released the 3 nuts, so now will be the last nut to come off. All right, that nut is now off. And I'm going to reach in and try to hold the downpipe the best that I can. And as I'm pulling it out, I got to turn it 180 degrees so that it'll clear everything. Okay, now that the downpipe is out of the car, we're going to go ahead and spray all these 10 millimeter bolts with some penetrating oil, because this part of the car is under a tremendous amount of heat, and this will allow us to get all these off a lot easier. We'll flip it around and also spray those and then start to get to work on them. Next, I'm going to remove the oxygen sensor. There we go. That broke loose fairly easily, and now we can set that aside. Now here we have the right side downpipe that we just removed, and both replacement ScienceofSpeed downpipes. So our next step is going to be to squirt everything down with brake cleaner, both on the ScienceofSpeed pipe as well as on these heat shields, so that we get any of the penetrating oil off of them. And then we could start to prep bolting everything into place onto the ScienceofSpeed pipe. But first, I actually want to take a look at what the inside of each one of these catalytic converters looks like. Here is the factory honeycomb, and you can see that it's a grid-like honeycomb inside the catalyst, and it's very densely packed. Coming over to the ScienceofSpeed, we could see that it's actually round instead of grid-like, and the holes are a little bit bigger, which means we're going to get better flow out of this than this factory one. So I decided to get my scale out before I did anything else because I wanted to weigh the difference between these two. And the stock one is 17 pounds and the aftermarket one from ScienceofSpeed is 11 pounds. So that's a drop in 6 pounds per side. So after we install these in the car, we should be 12 pounds lighter. Now what I'm going to do next, and why I have the gloves on, is I'm going to take some brake cleaner and I'm going to clean the shields as well as the new pipe so that I get any type of oils that are on this pipe from preserving it, as well as removing any oil from penetrating fluid that we used on these, so I can assemble these onto the pipe as well as that oxygen sensor. Next we want to use some anti-seize and put that on the oxygen sensor and install it into the pipe. Now I did pick up some copper anti-seize, but it also comes with a small packet in the kit itself. Now in order to apply the anti-seize to the O2 sensor, we don't want to get it on the sensor itself, but try to keep it on the side of the threads and we won't get any anti-seize flowing into the exhaust. Of course, if I get any type of extra residue on here, just use a clean cloth and wipe it off. Next we'll want to torque this down to 33 pounds-feet or 45 Newton meters. So make sure we tuck our wire into the slot. And then we're going to tighten until we hear the click. Next we're going to use the kit of bolts that was provided by ScienceofSpeed in order to replace the original rusty bolts. So we're going to find these same bolts here and then we're going to reinstall our heat shields. Next we'll want to take the supplied bolts and we just want to apply some anti-seize to each of these. I'm not going to lie, that was a messy job just putting that anti-seize on there. So next I'm going to go ahead and line up the heat shields with the brackets. And of course, if you can't remember which side goes which, there's little cutouts here for the oxygen sensor. So it's flat on the back and has divots on the front. This little clamshell, sort of a pain in the neck. But I guess once we get a few started, it won't be so bad. There we go. So we don't want to tighten these too tight because things don't line up real easily at first. And of course you're going to get anti-seize on everything as you're working on this. So try to keep your hands clean the best you can. Next we want to torque all of these to 7.2 pounds-feet or 9.8 Newton meters. Now I used a different kind of torque wrench this time. I used a pound-inches torque wrench and I got 86.4 pound-inches for the same settings in pounds-feet because some torque wrenches don't go down low enough. They only go down to 10 pounds-feet. So if you are interested in one of these, I will have a link in the description for the kind of tool that I use today. Next I have these studs that I need to install in the new downpipe, and I also want to use some anti-seize on these. And I want to line them up exactly the way they are in the old downpipe. So I have the oxygen sensors pointing in the same direction, so I know exactly what needs to go where. Next I'm going to take a little bit of brake clean again, and I'm going to make sure that I have the inlet here all cleaned up, making sure there's nothing left on the face, because I'm going to reuse the existing gasket on the new downpipe. Finally, I'm going to apply some anti-seize to the ends of these studs and also the stud that is in the car itself in the end of the turbine housing. I'm also going to install the studs on the muffler side of the downpipes by also applying some anti-seize to these studs and screwing them in. So I'm going to start with this already rotated 180 degrees from its normal position. So you want to get your nuts started here on these studs, and these are locking nuts. So as you start them, they're going to start binding up. So you definitely got to use a wrench in order to start tightening them. So started all 4 of them, of course, tighten the top ones first. So now I'm going to start pulling the driver's side pipe off camera, and also completing the same work on it before we come back and finish the tightening sequence. All right, so we got all of our bolts torqued down except for one, and if you could see here, that's chewed up. The problem with this downpipe is that it's fatter than the factory downpipe in this location, so it's impossible to get anything on this nut and be square. It literally interferes, that is, the torque wrench or any wrench interferes with the downpipe itself. So this is the best I can do, is try to take a guess at the torque on this without rounding this nut off. This is not a good design. So every other bolt or every other nut was easy to torque, and everything is 33 pounds-feet. So was able to get in here and even underneath here, even from the top, was able to secure that nut back there. It's just this particular nut right here, no. And that's the same on both sides. So I tried the crowfoot on a torque wrench attempt to get the the bolt on the top of the back of the downpipe torqued at 33 pounds-feet. Nope, this isn't working. There's just no way I can verify that this is actually on the bolt. I can't see it. Everything is in the way. So I just took this this ratchet box wrench and put this extension on it and pulled it until it was tight. And I'm approximating 33 foot-pounds, but it's tight as I can get it. It's impossible to get anything in there in order to try to torque it down. So don't let anybody fool you when they say, oh yeah, just torque it down. And no, this isn't gonna happen. So you're just gonna have to tighten it the best you can and hope that you got it right. Okay, now that these pipes are in, it's important to feed that oxygen sensor cable up. Now you could see that silver part right in front of me with the horizontal engraving in it. Well, if you lay the connector against that, you can actually reach it from up inside the trunk. So I was able to reach down in here and then pull it straight up and then plug it back in. And of course, right down in here is where it connects. And there's also another connection for the rubber grommet or the rubber sleeve, you know, right behind that gray connector, right up in there. So it's hard to be able to see it on camera, but that's how you feed it back into place so that your oxygen sensor is reattached. Now here on the driver's side, it's the same way, and there's just a place right here for that rubber piece to slip into, and then it plugs in right there at the bottom. So our next step is to put on the brackets that hold the downpipes to the transmission. So I've gone ahead and laid out the original transmission mounts, which are on the outside, along with the replacements that came with the kit from ScienceofSpeed. So this is the right side, and you can see it has sort of a hard angle to it right there where it's curved, whereas this one's a little bit smoother. So this is the left-hand side, and this is the right-hand side. Now what we're going to do is mount it to the transmission first and just start this bolt, and we're then going to start the bolt that's on top of the cat, the downpipe. Now we're going to put some NECs on these bolts, same with this one as well, and then hand start them, and then we're going to torque them down to 33 pounds-feet. So I have the one here with the really weird angle to it, and this is going to be going on the right side. Now this will be on the transmission over here, and this will be on the downpipe. Now as we look in there, it's definitely hard to see from this angle, but right in front of where the oxygen sensor is, that's the mount that goes onto the transmission. And then up above there will be where it connects to the downpipe. Of course, it's going to be completely difficult to be able to record, so I'm just giving you an idea. It's going to be sitting like this, so it'll be bolted to the transmission here and the downpipe here. So we're going to get this started and apply some NECs, of course. So the trick to this is to pull down on the back of the cat, and then you can actually see there on the left-hand side, I got the bolt started on the transmission side. So now I'm going to go from the front and put the bolt in the top of the bracket, but that's what you got to do. You got to have some small arms in order to get in there, let me just tell you. All right, so here is the top of the turbo housing, and I'm going to show you where we got to go. Is that black piece that's right here, that little hole, that's where I got to go with the bolt. Now it's nearly impossible for me to get my hand in there. I'm actually going to try to get the camera in a position where it'll help me see this stuff, because I can't see it with my own eyes. So I'm going to try to find a way to set the camera up to help me. I think that's the only place I can put the camera. And then if I stick my hand in here, that's the hole right there. Okay, so I can actually use the camera and my cell phone in order to preview exactly where I need to get my hand. This is crazy, but this seems like the only way I'm going to be able to do this. Let me grab the bolt. This is incredibly difficult. Without another set of eyes, I just can't tell what the heck's going on right now. This is very hard. Damn. All right, so I've lined the bracket back up. I keep having trouble getting this bolt where it needs to be. I don't even know if this is going to help. Certainly bright in my face. Okay, let's try this again. I think I'm in the hole. Wow. Whew. All right, let's see if I can get my hand on this and turn it in. Hopefully it doesn't fall out. Wow, got it started. Okay, now that we have our bolt up there installed from the front and our bolt over here is started, we can go ahead and reach in and finish tightening this one and then torque both of these to 33 pounds-feet. Okay, now that we have everything tightened up as far as the downpipe is concerned, we can start reinstalling our heat shields. Now I have the lower heat shield just resting in there, and there's 3 bolts that hold that on. Of course, one of them goes to the turbo housing, so that's these 3 right here. Then there's a top heat shield that we need to reinstall. And there are 2 nice looking bolts and 2 rusty bolts. They want to use brand new bolts that they provided in the kit. They're going to go back here because it's hotter back here, so that's why these are already starting to tarnish. So I'm going to go ahead and reinstall these and use some copper NECs on those, and then we'll come back and torque them all down. Then after that, we are going to install these. So we have the nut and the washer that's going to go onto the block, and of course this bolt is going to go through here and onto the top of the turbo housing. Okay, we've got this heat shield in place. Of course, we use the new bolts here in the back, and these bushings here will move around. So when you try to put these bolts into the side of the heat shield that's connected to the new downpipe, they may not line up perfectly, so you can actually move them around. These are easy to move around, the bushings, so that everything lines up perfectly. So we got all of them installed here in the top and here in the bottom. And yes, we set our torque wrench to 15 pounds-feet, and we needed to use this extra long extension in order to get to these 2 that are underneath this housing. So this side's complete. Now we're going to go on to the other side. Okay, now that all the heat shields have been torqued, we're going to install this bracket, which connects between the block and the turbo housing. This is on the left side, so it's marked with L. And we're going to put the nut on this, and then we're going to put the bolt on the other side after we put some anti-seize on it. Now the torque setting for the engine side of this, because that's a nut, that is 48 pounds-feet or 65 Newton meters. And of course, For the bolt that's going to go here into the turbo housing, that'll be 33 pounds-feet or 45 Newton meters. This is easier to get to from the side of the car, and of course the nut side is better with a long extension from the top here. So our next step is going to be to install the oxygen sensors. So I'm going to go ahead and grab the oxygen sensors, which I've put here. And I'm going to put a little bit of anti-seize on these. I'm going to thread them into the top of the turbo housing there, and I'm going to torque them to 33 pounds-feet. The oxygen sensor installed and the wiring harness reconnected on both sides. Now our next step is going to be to install the air cleaner. So we have to install that metal plate that goes down, and then the base of the air cleaner, install the air cleaner as well, and then the top, and then hook up the wiring as well as the tubes here in the front, and that will complete the actual air cleaner installation, and then we'll move on to the next step. Now I've gone ahead and installed the bottom of the airbox cleaners as well as these rubber ducts, not rubber ducks, that pull in air from the outside. So this is now ready for the top of the air cleaner. And you'll also notice here I've also installed the silver charge pipes from ScienceofSpeed. Now these charge pipes, I will have a video on those. There'll be a link in the description below so you can check out the installation process, but I figured while I had everything apart here I would just go ahead and take care of that. So now I'm going to go ahead and install the top of the air cleaner and make sure that I reconnect the mass airflow sensor connectors as well, and tighten everything down. Now there's a trick to getting these clips here that you can barely reach once you have the airbox on top. You just suspend a little bit of a wire around it and then you pull up, and that will get you to reinstall the top of the airbox. I have a separate video on that where I installed the K&N air filters. All right, now I have the exhaust actually up on the hangers, got some assistance, and also have the chair here propped up on the one side. I have the new gasket, so I'm going to set the gasket in the downpipe. You can actually see the ridges in there, and then I can start bolting this up. Okay, so I've gone ahead and torqued all of these studs down. These are 33 pounds-feet, just like everything else almost. And now all I have to do is reinstall the clips here into the exhaust valves. And reconnect this cable retainer. There we go. So now everything is back together as far as the components that are necessary for the vehicle to run. And I've just verified everything is looking good and intact up here. We have all of our connectors reconnected. Everything is good. This is all tight as far as the exhaust is concerned. Looking in here from the side, I can still see components because I haven't yet installed the heat shielding and the air ducts, but I don't need to do that quite yet because right now all I want to do is verify that everything's working. Because if I have to pull an oxygen sensor, for example, it's right here and I should be able to get to that. So let me go ahead and start the vehicle next, and we'll verify that everything is actually working okay and that we don't have any check engine lights. Okay, here's the moment of truth. Now we got the garage doors partially open so that we can allow any exhaust to escape, and we're going to go ahead and start this up, and I'm going to verify no check engine lights. I know I don't have the bumper attached, so none of the parking sensors will obviously be connected here, so that may give me some type of an error, but I don't expect too much of a problem. Everything looks good to go. Let's start it up. Wow. That was a loud cold start, let me tell you. Woo! A lot louder than I expected. There we go. Now we've idled down. Sounds good. Sounds really good. No check engine lights, we just need fuel. Now we can see here there's a little bit of burn off of the exhaust, but not much. It's just a tiny little bit of smoke, and matter of fact, I think it was worse than the second that I was just over here. But yeah, everything is looking pretty good. I hear something up here that's kind of noisy, like making a very tinny sound, tin, 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 but I think it's in this set of pipes. I don't think that's from the exhaust at all. And that could be normal, but I've of course never run it with the engine cover off. Well, that sounded awesome. The cold start was a little bit louder than I really expected. So I thought that this thing was like going to be way too loud, but I'm also in my garage here, so it's like an echo chamber. Now, when this did finally idle down and I gave it a few revs, you could definitely hear those turbos. That is awesome. So my next step is going to be to reinstall the back carpet here. I'm going to let this all cool down. I have the garage doors all the way open now. I figured I'd just open them up. Let everything cool down and then get to getting the cover on here, and also getting some of the heat shields and ducting and whatnot reinstalled here on the sides. So now the engine's cooled down, I'm going to go ahead and install the components that are on the sides here. So we have a heat shield, and this has the 2 slots in it, and it's bent so I can easily, or more easily, get it in here. All right, so there were 2 bolts just behind here, and I was able to reach down with a socket and screw them in. But these 2 bolts that are here on the other side of this frame are a total pain. Now you can get your arm in here, but you're gonna damage yourself up. So put a piece of leather, piece of cloth, something over this to protect yourself while you're reaching back, because you're gonna need to hold whatever you're using. And in my case, you know, I was just using a box wrench, this ratcheting wrench, and I had to hold it with my right hand, and using my left hand I had to work it back and forth. So you could either do that with a socket or a box wrench. Either way, this probably took a half hour just to tighten these 2. Now the next step is going to be to install this plastic duct. So this plastic duct is going to go here and then connect up there. So I'm just going to push this into place on camera, and then we'll just line up the bolts here and bolt this into place. All right, I'm on the driver's side, and I just finished putting this heat shield and duct in. This took about 45 minutes. The problem with this side of the car is that the heat shield is wider than the opening, because you have your fuel lines where you fuel up right here. So that gets in the way. This is almost easier to get from inside the engine compartment when the air cleaner is not installed. So yeah, I'd probably recommend putting these in first before you put the air cleaners in, so that you don't have the problems that I've had. Again, it was very difficult to get these 2 installed at the bottom. I was able to sneak an arm through the hole here where the axle is, and that helped. But these 2 bolts here were very, very difficult. This is plastic, but there's like a metal catch with a nut on the other side. This one was difficult because I ended up bending this a little bit in order to clear these pipes, and when I bent it back, it wasn't lined up properly. So this was probably one of the harder screws I've had to get back into the car. So, all right, the heat shields are done. And then I could pick up my crash bar and push it over the hangers the best I can. So I got to be able to get my hands in there. In order to push the two together, because the rubber on the hanger is kind of flexible. Here we go. There's a rubber seal here, so we got to get up. We have to actually, when we push up, we got to push up and then try to get this screw started. There we go. Got one started. Whew. Wow. Okay, we're going to do the same here on the other side. Push up. There we go. Whew. A lot of pressure on this seal. At least they're started. Okay, we got 2 more on this side and 2 more on that side. And the instructions say that we need to torque these to 28 pounds-feet. And finally, we reinstall the foam piece that goes between the bumper and the car. Okay, there's 2 divots in it that line up with the holes in the bumper here. And then it snaps into place. Next, we're going to go ahead and reinstall the engine cover. We're going to start with the back side, so the part closest to us. And here we can actually see there's some rubber bumpers on here, and some of these are here to capture some of the parts right here. So we're going to go ahead and press this down, and then we're going to install all the bolts on the top. In our instructions that we used in order to remove these covers, we're going to use them again, and it'll obviously show, at least in this case here, like A and B. B's longer, and it'll show you exactly where the B bolts go. So I'm going to go ahead and install all these bolts into the carbon fiber engine cover. Okay, so our final step here is going to be to install the bumper. Now I've already put some saran wrap on the bumper just to protect it, and I've gone ahead and put some painter's tape here over any other parts of the car where the bumper may impact the car. And I have some quick detailer here. I'm going to spray some quick detailer along where the bumper connects to the car, so that I can ensure that when it snaps into place, it has some lubrication on these little plastic tabs that are here. Bumper. So this is Pat from the future, and this installation went really well. Obviously, I got back under the car and reattached all of the hardware, and everything lined up really perfectly, as you can see here in this video. Now, I had sold the car already, so it's really been 3 years. I've driven it that entire time, and the exhaust sounded amazing, and everything held up so well. This will be a cold start, and just preparing it for transport. Sounding really good. beautiful day. Gonna miss this NSX though, gotta tell you. First supercar. First opportunity to really get out there and enjoy performance hybrid of the Acura.